The alpha male charged the vet. What he was trying to show them changed everything. The first thing that unsettled everyone was not the sound, but the silence that followed it. A silence so sudden, so unnatural, it seemed to swallow the entire reserve whole. Moments before, the air had been alive with the layered orchestra of the wild, the low hum of insects, the distant chatter of birds hidden deep in the canopy, the rhythmic rustle of leaves under the slow breath of. But now, everything had stopped. Even the humid air, thick with the damp scent of soil and decaying foliage, felt frozen, as if the forest itself had pulled back, waiting. And then he charged. A massive alpha male, his body a fortress of muscle, his dark fur streaked with silver like a storm frozen in motion, burst forward from the shadows with terrifying speed. The ground trembled under his weight. Dry leaves cracked sharply beneath his knuckles. His breath came out in deep, guttural bursts, warm and heavy, carrying the raw metallic scent of adrenaline. Straight toward the vet. Dr. Daniel Hayes didn't move. Not because he was brave, but because, in that split second, something deeper than fear locked his body in place. The world narrowed to the pounding in his ears, the damp grip of sweat beneath his collar, the faint sting of antiseptic still lingering on his hands from the earlier procedure. This wasn't supposed to happen. Everything about the situation defied instinct. Alpha males do not charge without warning, not like this. Not toward someone who had never posed a threat. Not toward someone who had, for years, been part of the invisible boundary of trust. And yet here he was, closing the distance, eyes burning, not with blind rage, but with something far more unsettling. Urgency. If you can feel your heart beating a little faster right now, take a moment, pause with us in this breath between fear and understanding. And before we uncover what happened next, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because stories like this, they connect us across distances we don't even realize exist. The reserve stretched across miles of dense, untamed wilderness, where the air was always heavy with life. It carried layers of scent, the sweetness of crushed leaves, the faint bitterness of tree bark, the earthy richness of damp ground still holding yesterday's rain. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, painting everything in shifting patterns of gold and shadow. This was his kingdom. They called him Magnus. For over a decade, he had ruled this land, not with constant aggression, but with a quiet, unshakable authority. His presence alone was enough to command space. Other animals adjusted their paths without confrontation. Even the wind seemed to move differently around him, as though aware of the gravity he carried. But Magnus had not always been this way. Years ago, when he was younger, raw with strength and impulse, he had been volatile, unpredictable. It was during those early years that Dr. Daniel Hayes first entered his world. Not as a friend, not even as a tolerated presence, but as something unknown. The first encounters had been tense, layered with the thick, electric edge of uncertainty. Daniel remembered the sharp smell of fear, his own, cutting through the forest air as he stood at a distance, observing, never pushing boundaries. Over time, something shifted, not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. Magnus began to recognize him not as prey, not as rival, but as something neutral, a presence that came and went without disruption, a figure who never invaded, never challenged. Trust, in the wild, is not given, it is earned in fragments. And over the years, fragment by fragment, a silent understanding formed. Daniel learned Magnus's rhythms, the way his breathing slowed at dusk, the subtle change in posture when something in the environment felt off, the deep, resonant vocalizations that carried meanings no human language could fully translate. And Magnus, in return, allowed him something rare. Proximity, not closeness in the human sense, but tolerance, recognition. A fragile bridge between two worlds, until the day everything began to break. It started subtly. Magnus's movements became slower, not weak, but restrained. As though each step required a decision, his appetite declined. The rich scent of fresh vegetation that once drew him instantly now seemed to linger unnoticed around him. The keepers noticed first, then the trackers, then Daniel. There was something wrong. The air around Magnus carried a different smell now, faint but unmistakable, a sour, almost acidic undertone that clung to his fur, blending with the usual musk of the wild. It was the scent of imbalance, of something internal, hidden beneath layers of strength. They monitored him carefully, at first from a distance, then closer, too close. The day they attempted intervention was heavy with tension. The sky hung low, clouds swollen with the promise of rain. The humidity pressed against the skin, making every breath feel thick, incomplete. They moved cautiously, prepared for resistance. But Magnus did something unexpected. He didn't fight, not in the way they anticipated. He watched, eyes tracking every movement, every shift of weight, every sound. There was no panic in him, only an intense, almost unsettling awareness. The procedure was brief. Sedation administered, vitals checked, no immediate answers. But something deeper, something unseen, was brewing beneath the surface. And now, here he was, charging, not at the team, at Daniel. The distance closed in seconds. The ground vibrated with each step. The sharp scent of crushed grass filled the air, mixing with the heavy musk of Magnus's presence. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't aggression. It didn't feel like aggression. And then, just before impact, Magnus stopped. So suddenly the silence cracked. He didn't strike, didn't roar. Instead, he turned, just slightly, and looked back, not at the team, not at the forest, at something behind him. Something hidden. His chest rose and fell rapidly now, breath hot and uneven. There was a tremor beneath his strength, a fracture in the armor. Daniel followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing, just the dense layering of foliage, the shifting shadows, the muted green depths of the forest. Then movement, small, weak, almost invisible. The smell hit him before the sight fully formed, a faint, sharp note beneath the forest's usual scent. Not decay, not yet, but close. They moved carefully, each step slow, deliberate, the ground soft beneath their feet, damp with recent rain. The air grew heavier as they approached, thick with a tension that felt almost physical. And then they saw it, a young one. Curled into itself, breathing shallow, barely alive. Its fur, once soft and full of life, now clung in damp, uneven patches. The skin beneath carried a dull, unhealthy tone. The faint, bitter scent of infection lingered in the air around it. Everything clicked. Magnus hadn't been charging to attack. He had been leading them, showing them, asking. The realization hit like a quiet storm, slow, overwhelming, undeniable. This was not instinct. Not survival behavior. This was something else, something deeper. Daniel felt his throat tighten, the humid air suddenly harder to breathe. The sounds of the forest began to return, soft at first, then building. A distant bird call, the rustle of leaves, the whisper of wind returning to motion. Time moved again. The team shifted into action, careful, precise. The young one was fragile, its body warm but fading, breath shallow, heartbeat weak. The scent of antiseptic filled the air again as Daniel worked, hands steady despite the weight of the moment. Behind him, Magnus watched, not moving, not interfering, but present, every muscle held in controlled tension, every breath measured, every eye movement tracking the smallest detail. Hours seemed to stretch within minutes. Treatment began. Fluids, medication, stabilization. The forest dimmed as clouds thickened overhead, casting everything into a muted gray light. The air cooled slightly, carrying the faint promise of rain that never fully arrived. And then, a change. Subtle, but real. The young one's breathing deepened. Not much, but enough. Enough to break the edge of fear that had gripped them all. Daniel exhaled, not realizing how long he had been holding his breath. And in that moment, Magnus moved. Slowly, carefully, he approached. No aggression, no dominance, just presence. He lowered himself beside the young one, his massive frame suddenly gentle, controlled. The contrast was almost surreal, the same force that had shaken the ground now moving with delicate precision. He leaned in, close, their breaths synchronized, deep, steady, a rhythm shared between strength and vulnerability. The tension in the air dissolved, replaced by something softer, something quieter. Relief. In the days that followed, healing became its own kind of language. The forest shifted with it. The smells changed, the sharp edge of illness fading, replaced by the clean, earthy scent of recovery. The light seemed warmer, filtering through the canopy with renewed softness. The young one grew stronger, step by step, breath by breath. And Magnus remained, not always close, but always near, watching, waiting, present in a way that no instinct alone could explain. For Daniel, the experience rewrote something fundamental. Everything they thought they understood, about dominance, about behavior, about the boundaries between human reasoning and animal instinct, shifted. Because what they had witnessed was not just intelligence, it was intention, it was empathy, it was a decision. Magnus had recognized a problem beyond his ability to solve, and instead of retreating, he reached across worlds. That is not survival, that is connection. And perhaps something even deeper, something we are only beginning to understand. As the sun finally broke through the clouds days later, casting long golden beams across the forest floor, Daniel stood at a distance once more, watching. Magnus moved through the trees, powerful yet calm, the young one now trailing behind, steady, alive, part of the rhythm again. The air smelled of warmth, of life, of something restored, and in that moment there was no divide, no separation between human and animal, only a shared understanding, a silent agreement that life, in all its forms, reaches for itself even across impossible distances. If this story moved something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel that quiet connection, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in the unseen bonds of this world. And tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where an animal understood something you couldn't explain? Because sometimes, the deepest truths don't need words. They just need to be felt.